Well, Mel, I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk about your new film. Is it still under Inbetweening, or is it going now as 30 to 45? Which title
It
is it?
it's still in betweening. Like it's
Inbetweening, awesome.
yeah, it was 30 to 45 when we tried to do the Kickstarter the first time.
Sure.
And in the process, like by the time we actually made it, it was in betweening, you know.
And I thought Inbetweening is a very appropriate title for
Oh
this
yeah.
film. When watching it, I'm like, Inbetweening. It's got a couple of different meanings going on in
Right,
here
right.
for it. So, if you would mind, in your words, telling my listeners a little bit about what Inbetweening is about.
Well, it's a very very thinly veiled autobiographical thing. Um, what's interesting is that it's kind of a mishmash of several different periods of my life. So it's not all like a one-to-one comparison necessarily, but most everything that happened in it is true. It just might be from different parts of
Sure, sure.
the the whole, I guess, almost 30-year journey of me, being a filmmaker, right? Because I started when I was in college,
Hmm.
and just every weird thing that I've gone through. So Inbetweening is like a slightly fictionalized version of all that stuff,
Sure.
that focuses on Eric Linson, who's a minority filmmaker. He's mixed like I am. I'm half black, half white, and that's important because a lot of the weird conversations I've gotten into were directly related to that.
Sure.
And it just follows his journey as he's kind of like in between projects. Like he's made movies, and a lot of people get that twisted and think that, oh, he's rich and famous and he's got it made. But it focuses on more the reality of the day to day of what you really have to do
Sure.
and have to go through as an independent filmmaker trying to make something happen.
Yeah, and having covered indie films for a number of years now, just watching it, I'm like watching this going, this feels like it's a little bit of a catharsis for Mel.
Oh yeah, yeah, 100%. Like it's definitely one of those projects where like I I mean I wanted to make it for sure, but it's like I had to make it. Like I
Sure.
had to get it out and get all that stuff out because a lot of that stuff I've been living with, since witchcraft. I mean, obviously
Mm.
there's that whole part in it. So it's just I just had to sort of purge it from myself, right?
And you do it in a very creative manner for sure. Now, did you do work at a pizza shop when you were first
Oh
starting, or?
yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
that's a more recent thing
Uh-huh.
because it was so the whole time that I've been doing the movie thing, I've always had a job, like a
Sure.
day
Right.
job.
Yeah.
And right what made that moment so brutal, or that moment in time so brutal, is
Mm.
right after I did Psychic Experiment. I had a full-time job at a nonprofit that was a videography job,
Yeah.
paid well, really
Hmm.
cushy, but they eliminated the position, and that happened right as we were about to have my daughter Reagan. Like, I mean,
Oh,
like, so they,
yeah.
the baby on the
Hmm.
way, and then I lose my full-time job. So I immediately started scrambling because I knew, I'm gonna have to make money somehow, right?
Yeah.
And no similar jobs were hiring or would hire me. And then a lot of the stuff on my resume, aside from the day job stuff, was like film stuff, which
Hmm.
people they couldn't get their head around. Like,
Sure.
oh,
Sure.
well, you assistant directed on this. Like, what does that mean? Even though it's a
Right.
very specialized, difficult, and those skills can translate into other things. So really, the only thing I could get hired as was a pizza delivery guy. And when I went into the interview for that, the manager John, he was like, "Dude, you seem great. I'm sure I can depend on you, but why are you here?" Like, like he
Yeah.
just couldn't
Yeah.
get it.
Yeah.
And I was like, literally, this is the only thing I can do. So I
Sure.
ended up, I delivered pizzas for, I mean, it was a few years that
Hmm.
I did that. But what was weird about it, and the thing that sort of really convinced me to really lean into the script, is that whole time was punctuated in the background by me trying to get this ghost movie going that I've been working
Sure.
on for years.
Mm.
And at that point, we had Robert England attached. I don't think any of them mind me saying this. That we had Robert England attached. Debbie was going to be in it. Lisa Wilcox.
Sure.
At different times, we had Anthony Mackie attached, like pre
Wow.
Falcon,
Yeah.
like he had just got cast as the Falcon. That's how long ago it was. But no, me being a comic book nerd, I was like, well, that means eventually he's going to be Captain America. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, so, but because and then we had Terrence Howard, oddly enough, attached for a little bit. Charles Dutton. It would. Um, it was just crazy. But so I'm like fielding calls to try to get this thing done as I'm dropping pizzas off to
Yeah.
people's houses, and there was a moment where I was delivering like about 20 pizzas to a pool party for all these 14-year-old girls. And at the same time, I caught a call from this producer that I was working with, and he put, I don't know if I want to say the person's name, but
No, that's fine. Sure.
there's a piece in the movie about it.
Hmm.
But there was a very famous pop star that everybody knows that was interested in being in the movie. And he's very cool. Like I have nothing bad to
Yeah.
say about that person. But I'm talking to this person that's world famous as I'm dropping off 20 pizzas to these girls who are doing nothing but complain about the pizzas. And,
Sure, sure,
and I was
sure.
like, if you
Yeah.
just knew who I was on the phone with, like it was just, and I'm like,
Yeah.
this has to be a movie. Like no one ever tells this side of,
Hmm.
and the thing is, like having lived in LA for a little bit, working out there for a while, some version of that story is very common,
Right.
but people don't talk about it because it's like you can't admit to it because people get it
Sure.
twisted. They're like, "Oh, you're working in the normal day to day. You're not a real filmmaker, or whatever."
Yeah.
But everybody's doing that. No one wants to admit to it. So
There's people doing day jobs, or if or doing the convention circuit in between jobs, and that's
yeah,
that's a day
100%.
job. I think they sometimes don't consider it that, but you look at it going, no, that's your day job. I mean, that's still,
Right.
you got to
Yeah.
show up and work in that. So yeah, I get
Yep.
that too, where it seems like nobody wants to admit that they're working a common job in between their normal film jobs. Because I saw a stat somewhere where it was like, yeah, you have everybody, all these filmmakers like yourself, working and grinding, and then only this amount of percentage kind of make it, and then this amount of percentage actually make it as a career to where that's all
Right.
they're doing. And it's like so small of a
Yeah.
pie. But
Yeah.
you would think it was bigger because, like you said, no one wants to talk about it, or
Yeah.
no one wants to talk about that they were in an indie horror film for their first film either.
Right. Right. Exactly.
They're like, no, that wasn't me. I wasn't in that. Sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I loved the character, and I want to get first to picking this person, because since this is fairly autobiographical, how did you go about to finally landing on your Eric, Brandon Cole?
That was a process because like most everybody else, let me try to think it, make sure this is true. It is true. Most everyone else, like I kind of wrote
Sure.
for, you know what
Hmm.
I mean? Like I was like,
Yeah.
I know I want Debbie in this sort of playing herself, right? And I know even the comedic stuff, like I'm like, oh, Steven would be good for this. It's a
Right.
lot of people that I've worked with on other things. But then when I got to casting who would essentially be me, I'm like, okay, well, it's got to be the person needs to be mixed race because
Hmm.
that's a huge part of like what they're going through,
Sure.
and they've got to, I mean, I feel like you've got to like empathize with what's going on with them.
Hmm.
The thing, it's weird to say, I guess it's weird to get your head around maybe, but when I would put a casting call out for mixed race actors, almost everything you get back is people that are doing the Vin Diesel thing. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
sure. Yeah.
Like they're
Yeah.
not that, and I
Yeah.
love, I like Vin
Yeah.
Diesel. He's one
Yeah.
of us.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I would love for Vin Diesel to play me in a movie, but but you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
they're
They're,
going for
they're
that
yeah.
thing, or
Yeah.
it's like somebody like Shamar Moore, that
Hmm.
type of person, right? Which is not bad at all, but it just wouldn't. It wouldn't work for this, right?
Right.
As as much as I'd love to Mary Sue that as being me in the movie, right? Um, so and then alternatively, a lot of the people I saw, there were some good reads, but they were just like too young, not even young necessarily, but
Mhm.
they read young.
Right.
It's like
Yeah.
they couldn't get that, like they've been through the ringer a little bit, that world weariness. And Brandon actually, I don't remember how he sent in his interview. He lives in Austin. A friend of his, I guess, told him about it. But when he sent it in, I was like, oh yeah, this could totally work. Like I've never had hair that cool, unfortunately. I always struggled with it. But
Yeah.
but I was like, yeah, this could work. But even with him, I was like, man, he's almost a little too good looking. I don't think he'd buy it. But like
Yeah. Yeah.
I was like, man, are people going to believe this? Or are they going to think that
Yeah.
I'm trying to do some ego, you know what I mean? Like, but then I actually drove to Austin. I did a couple of reads with him,
Mhm.
and it wasn't just about the read, it was like more like the hang too, because I was
Right.
like trying to see how he, just what his vibe was.
Right.
And I immediately knew. I was like, okay, this guy, this can work, this
Hmm.
can work. And he had worked before, but I believe this was his first like major lead.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so he was excited too. And then yeah, once we really got into it, he was just down for whatever, and he got to spend a lot of time with us doing this indie movie, so he kind of
Sure.
got to see it from that side too,
Hmm.
and get that aspect of it. So yeah, and I think it worked out really well.
Yeah, it did. I really dug his performance quite a bit. It was believable. Again, just falling back to other indie filmmakers like yourself I've talked to, I'm like, yeah, this feels like exactly what I've talked to about folks who are trying to make their film and get through the grind and the opportunities and then the concessions that producers or possible investors try to ask you to make for your
Right.
film, which is one of the biggest things I didn't realize being a viewer for so long until I started learning more about the behind the scenes stuff of just how much sometimes distributors ask filmmakers to give up or add or throw in before they actually put their
Yeah.
money in. And
Yeah.
you address that in here quite humorously with
Yeah.
with a wonderful trio of characters.
Oh yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah. And again, those are all like real conversations. Or if anything, I always tell people, if anything, I pulled back on them because
Oh,
you wouldn't
sure.
believe the truth. Like if I said what they actually said, it's so wild. One thing that I wish I'd put in, I think about this a lot, and it's kind of funny in that it's what you would expect and not what you would expect.
Mhm.
But I always think about this is like when we did Psychic Experiment, at the time it was called Walking Distance, and we sold it to Lionsgate, mainly because Katie Featherston was in it, from
Sure.
Paranormal Activity.
Mhm.
And we referenced that in Inbetweening. But it was like a 2 hour movie. And then when we sent it off to them, they came back and their first notes were, okay, well, we need to cut it down to 90 minutes.
Oh, gee.
Yeah, and I said, okay, well, and of course at that time I'm like, no, my vision, it'll never work.
Right.
But because they said that, I was like, well, clearly they have some ideas of what they want me to cut out. Like
Right.
there's something or someone they don't
Right.
like or whatever, right? And so my producer and I went back to them and was like, okay, well, what do you want us to cut? Let us know. And they're like, oh, we don't care. Just make it 90 minutes because those DVDs are cheaper. Those are cheaper to
Oh my
replicate.
God.
So it's really like
Yeah.
it really was just about saving money. And so I was like, wow, that's, it kind of caught me off guard because I thought they would have notes,
Notes,
but
but
really it
no,
was
they
just,
just want that runtime.
yeah, they just want to, yeah, save money. And then, eventually, because the process of that, all that took so long, it was also a good lesson in, because we sold it right before Paranormal Activity came out,
Mhm.
the wide release. It took so long to go through the contract stuff and the sale that I think Paranormal Activity 2 was about to come out.
Sure.
So that's when our delivery date. So I had like the better part of a year to kind of set with it. And then by the time I went back to it and opened up the program again, I was like, oh yeah, this can go, this can go, this can
Sure.
go, this can
Yeah.
go. Like I wasn't so married to it all.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I've noticed with some, especially like first time features. You're watching it, and you're going, "There's a good film in here, but it doesn't need to be 2.5 hours long." But I can understand also you want your vision, and you have your story to tell, and it's hard to separate yourself, especially early on in your career. And
Yeah.
that's great that you were able to do that
Yeah.
objectively because. I've seen some where they didn't, and it kind of hurts the film because you're like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of great performances, a lot of great things in here, but people start checking out after two,
Right. Right.
but
And there's
that,
always the trap of, oh, we spent so long to get this location or get this shot or whatever. It's got to be in there. But yeah, if it doesn't work,
yeah,
you know,
and it me considering myself a little bit of a creative, I can completely understand not necessarily wanting to cut stuff. And I mean, you address that in here. You address a lot of, like I said, that's why it felt like catharsis because you just address a lot of things that I've seen either online or in groups or talked personally to filmmakers about. And that's what I loved about this is kind of a window to kind of pulling back the veil on indie filmmaking. Uh,
Yeah.
and I appreciated that quite a bit because it feels quite honest. Was it one of those when you were doing the script for this to where you're like, maybe I shouldn't put this in?
There were a couple things because I was like, either it was just so personal, and I felt like this with Mystery Spot too, but then
Mhm.
Mystery Spot had more of a, like, it was a fictional kind of,
Right.
there was more to hide behind, right? But with this, there were some things I struggled about, or if it wasn't a personal thing, I was kind of like, man, is this too like inside baseball? Is
Right.
anybody gonna think this is funny or even get what the reference is, right?
Sure.
And then at the end of the day, I was like, man, fuck it, dude. I need to do this for myself. Like, what
Right.
the quote that I almost put at the beginning was the from Astro Zombies, where Glenn Danzig says, "Who am I doing this for, me or you?"
Yeah.
Like, because it really, I'm like, no, I'm making this for myself. I got to get all
Sure.
this out there. If people vibe with it, great,
Hmm.
but I need to do this. And I was worried about that up until we did the screening in Buffalo, the premiere at Amazing Fantasy Fest, because I just didn't know how it would land.
Right.
Greg liked it, but Greg is also a filmmaker, right? He's been doing it
Sure.
longer than I have. So I knew he'd get a lot of that stuff, but then just being in that room and seeing how people responded to it, and then the Q&A after, everybody's taking a different thing. People that really have nothing in common with me, I would think,
Right.
we're
Hmm.
just getting different things from it, and really vibing with it. So I was like, oh, okay, it's like there's something weird about when you get so specific, it becomes universal, you
Hmm.
know? So fortunately, I guess I struck that balance with it.
Well, I thought you struck that balance, and it's not only just in your story and feeling that it's personal and taking a little extra care with your characters and everything, but it's how you put this story together. Tell me a bit, what made you decide to do a bit of a surreal take of this? We've got animation, we at
Yeah.
one point got puppets. You have the singer of Fishbone showing
Right.
up in here.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
the actual singer of Fishbone showing,
Right.
which I loved. I loved that quite a bit.
Yeah.
For telling this story, what was your approach, or what made you want to tell it in this way?
Well, one of the Angelo from Fishbone thing, that was like one of the first things I wanted to do because
Mhm.
I've been a fan of theirs since I was in middle school, early high school.
Sure.
And because I was a, mixed kid, and I see this band that's playing rock music that's all
Right.
black, and I'm like, oh shit, there's somebody like me, because I got shit from my family and people
Mhm.
not really my friends, because my friends are a
Right.
little more eclectic, but just people I grew up with in the neighborhood. They're like, why do you listen to that white people shit? Like that kind of stuff. My dad, not what's as funny is my mom gave me the most shit, and my mom is the white one. you know, but I and I would always get accused of being too white or whatever.
Sure.
Like,
Hmm.
and so I saw this band that's like doing all that stuff, both the black stuff and just melding it together. And then I just immediately vibed with it. It's the same reason I liked Guns N' Roses immediately, because I knew Slash was a black dude or a mixed dude, like
Right.
me.
Hmm.
And so I connected to that because I'm like, oh, okay, this can work, right? Then as I followed Fishbone and became more of a fan, and through the years,
Hmm.
I started to learn that their story was one that's like not dissimilar to the story that Eric's going through in
Sure.
Inbetweening. Like there's crazy shit. They've been asked to do weird things.
Hmm.
There's crazy ups and downs. They have people like screw them over. They have other people succeed
Yeah.
instead of them by selling out or whatever. So, or you get like the whitewashed version of them that becomes hugely popular. And so I was like, dude, this has got to be like, if Eric has a spirit animal, it has to be Angelo Moore.
Yeah.
And also, Angelo is that guy. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
he's such a personality character. He's almost not human. If
Yeah.
you've ever seen
Yeah.
him perform, right?
Yeah.
And just knowing him, he's like that kind of an artistic, like he's pure art.
Hmm.
And so I wrote it like that. And I'm like, man, and I kind of knew them. We had worked with them on a documentary, and, I'd met him at shows and stuff, but
Sure.
I wasn't entirely sure he'd be down to do it. But then when the time came and it was obviously really going to happen,
Right.
he was 100% down. And a lot of it because of those reasons. I was like, at this point, Angelo, I have to tell you, like, I feel like I'm the fishbone of indie horror, you know. So,
Sure.
and he's like, I know what you mean, man. You know? So, so that's kind of how that I just and then I just started writing everything in his voice, and it just was so perfect, right? And with the animation stuff and the puppet stuff, I had always wanted to toy with that
Mhm.
or do a film partially that way. With this, it came very early on as almost like a functional thing because I wanted to put in stuff about me being a standardized patient, an SP, but I knew that wouldn't be able to go shoot in the school,
Right.
the medical
Mhm.
school, and we got the grant to do this movie. It was right after COVID, so I'm like, there's
Mm.
no way,
Yeah, yeah,
we're going to get into a
yeah.
hospital. In the past, we had
Mhm.
access to like for walking distance and Imago,
Mm.
we had access to like a nursing school that had a functioning hospital room where we
Sure.
could shoot a lot
Mhm.
of stuff, but I knew that was not going to happen in this climate. So I was like, man, how are we going to do that? Oh, it's like what Eric says, in the
Mhm.
movie. If you can't get a location, animate it, right? And so that also simultaneously, I was having talks with the animator Nick Butler,
Mm.
who had worked. He had done special effects, VFX for us for on Imago and um, Walking Distance,
Mhm.
and he did a little bit on Mystery Spot, I believe. But I knew he's a black creative
Mhm.
that's a little that's into like alternative stuff.
Sure.
So he and I talk, and it's like his experiences are very similar. So he immediately vibed with the material, and so I knew that I wanted him to be a part of it too. So that worked, and the puppets thing was just because I've always wanted to do something.
You just want to do
I grew
something
up
with
on the
puppets.
Muppets,
Yeah.
so yeah. So I'm like, okay, there's got to be a puppet scene, and then I just started thinking about if I tell the witchcraft story, it just started happening in my mind with puppets. I'm like, okay, well, this has to happen now.
It just fit. It just
Yeah,
fit.
absolutely.
Who'd you get for the puppeteering? Uh,
Um, so creation of the puppets, I actually found somebody on Etsy that just
mhm.
does likeness puppets,
Oh, nice.
and they do a really good job. Puppeteering, it was just me and Chris. Brandon did it one day. It's just whoever was there.
Sure,
You
sure.
know, there's a couple scenes where it's just me like this, hiding under like I have to push record, put the puppet on, and just do this. Because I mean, it really was just
Sure,
it was a DIY kind of thing. I mean, at most, my crew was 4 people on this.
sure.
Usually, it was 2 or 3, and a lot of it was just me. And I knew that's how it was going to be.
Right.
Um, just because we didn't have a lot of money going around, but also I didn't want to. I still had a lot of anxiety and PTSD from the last few things I'd worked on. So
Sure.
I didn't want to surround myself with a big crew. It was stressing me out. So even if I had the money to support it, I don't know that I would have done it.
Mhm. Well,
Um,
and it was and you shooting it at a small crew with all the other rather meta references in that feels like it's just a natural fit that you would have
right.
made this with a small crew because then it has that extra feel, that extra charm to it, which I found a lot with this. I loved the jumping with the animation in between that and the live action and stuff, and how you matched the animation with the live action
Yeah.
scenes too. So was some of the animation done before, or was that done after all the principal shooting was done with the live?
After it was done after
Yeah,
principal, and I sent what I did with it's all in the script and
sure.
whatever, and like where the transitions happen. But I sent Nick a rough assembly once we
Hmm.
got done shooting, and also like as because even shooting itself was stretched out over a few months as
Sure.
well, like
Mhm.
weekends and stuff. So we'd get something done. I'd send him a rough assembly of it, and then I'd send him like storyboards or like roughs of like what the
Mhm.
next thing would, even if it was half finished.
Right.
Just like, okay, here's the room we're in, where we're going to end, where we're going to pick up, kind of thing. And so and then as I was editing, he was kind of animating alongside concurrently with what I had. And then when I finally got picture lock, he did a couple final passes to make sure everything like really connected.
Matched up. Yeah, because it matched up really good. I'm watching it going, wow, this really works
Yeah.
well, and it
Yeah.
helped blend everything, kind of keep things moving.
Mm-hmm.
But how'd you find the train location? Okay, because I'm sitting here watching it.
Oh.
You've got the kid train, and I'm
Oh yeah.
like,
So that comes from when I was doing the standardized patient thing.
Sure.
There's a part, so the medical center here in Houston is right next to like where the zoo is, and
Okay.
there's a huge park called
Sure.
Herman Park. And that park, anybody that's from Houston will recognize that, because it's just like a that's where everybody goes to when they
Sure.
say go to the park. It's like the nicest, biggest park here. But that park has a scaled down train. And so sometimes when I would be doing SP stuff in the medical center, I would have a break or I'd get there early. So I would go get on this train that I've been riding since I was probably 4 years old, and just fall asleep and pass. That would be my break time, right? And it
Sure.
became
Yeah.
this weird Zen thing for me. And then weirdly enough, when I worked at the pizza place, it was very near a mall here.
Mm. Mhm.
And that mall has one of those, it's a train like the
Yeah.
one we have
Yeah.
in the movie where, it drives the kids around the mall. And I would do that on my break. Sometimes I would go cram myself in because they didn't care, if I paid for a
Yeah.
ticket, and just kind of chill out, ride around, and kind of zone out. I fell asleep in the train a couple times, but it just became this weird Zen thing for me. And so I was like, man, I got to recreate that. So initially, I was going to try to shoot either at that mall or at that park,
Sure.
but it was just difficult
Right.
both. And again, right after COVID, it was
Hmm.
very tough. So I just tried to find somebody that had a train like that, because there are people that bring them to parties or whatever and just will drive you around the
Hmm.
neighborhood. And it's not cheap, but it was worth it, like just to have it. And so I got the guy to come out for a couple of days, and a lot of it, there's a park in my neighborhood. We just took it out there and shot a lot of that, the main scene where Eric is
Hmm.
asleep and Andy wakes him up. And then later when he wakes up and she runs him off.
Yeah.
And then we did a lot of it here in my neighborhood, like literally right across the street. There was a
Nice.
church. There's a church right across the street from my house, and they were having
Uh-huh.
like a fall festival when we were shooting. So it almost, because of all the tents and stuff they had set up and rides, it looked like we were at a park. So I'm like, oh shit, this totally works.
It just,
But in both cases, when we were at the park at the front of the neighborhood and then across the street, people came out and they're like, okay, well, how much to ride the train? They thought it was part of
oh,
the
sure.
deal. They're like, no, sorry, we're shooting a movie.
See, well, you go, well, you could write it if you want to contribute to the movie. There you go.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah.
Of course, then you'd have to put people's names and the credits and kids credit, and then,
Right.
yeah.
Right. Right.
So,
But yeah, that was a thing, that was definitely one of those moments where I really had to wrestle with doing it, because it was probably that, and the puppets were probably the most expensive thing in the
oh,
movie.
sure. Hmm.
Not terribly expensive, but big chunks of,
Right.
we didn't have that much money. We got a grant for $50,000. And then Chris and I put in our
Hmm.
own money, right? So there wasn't a whole lot going around. So I really struggled with, man, do we really have to have this?
Right.
Because it's a large chunk of the budget. But at the end of the day, I was like, man, it's how I've always envisioned it. And I've had to compromise what I've done on every previous thing. Why not
Sure.
do it? Try to do everything this time, and just
And
make it work. And
and
we
it be,
did. We did.
and it becomes a kind of a key thing with him, because
Yeah.
him keep coming back to it, and then his dynamic with Andy, and with everything. I liked how it kind of kept coming back to the train, because I'm like, yeah, we've all been there where there's just that one spot you feel like you can go, and in this
Yeah.
case, it's the
Right.
train, and it felt natural, uh, you know,
Yeah.
and that's what I a lot of this, and then there's this interaction with his agent or producer. He had the green screen behind him in the car, and the
Oh, yeah.
video.
Yeah.
I take
Yeah.
it you've done that before.
Yes, to hide that I was in my car,
Yeah.
because that's at that library. That's literally what I would do. I would go get on their Wi-Fi, because you could access it from the car,
Sure.
and do meetings that way, and just be like, oh yeah, I'm in my office in the studio or whatever. Because again, it's like people get it twisted, right? They're
Right.
like, so I'm just trying to do everything I can to sort of hide the reality of what I was going through at the time. And usually it was that library is right by the pizza, where the pizza restaurant was. So it
Mm.
was,
Okay. So
and it was, I was like, man, we need to go to try to shoot this at that place. And they were all for it. They're like, oh
sure.
man, that's great. Sure. Come do whatever you want. But yeah, that's exactly what I would do. Just sit there and take meetings with my green screen behind me.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and like I said, a lot of this, it accomplishing this as your personal journey, it really felt like, you were speaking through your characters, through Brandon, through Eric, and through a number of other characters as well. And then you said you wrote a number of these parts for folks you know. Uh, I liked Debbie Rashawn's role in here. It
Yeah.
almost felt like she was going through some
Yeah,
catharsis.
for sure. Like there's a lot of stuff in there that was like I wrote a certain thing,
Yeah,
and then she's like, "Well, let me say this," and I was like, "Oh, that's a real thing, isn't it?" She's like, "Yeah." So yeah, it's like because the reason that she and I are so tight, one of the reasons, because she's one of my best friends, is because she gets it. She's been through it
sure.
too.
Hmm.
She has those stories. So yeah, I'm like, yes, please, whatever you want to throw in, whatever you're comfortable with throwing in, feel free, please do it. So,
Where'd you find her house? Whose house is that you shot in? Was
oh,
uh,
that's our house.
that's
It's
your house? Oh yeah,
yeah,
because it was
yeah.
like,
A lot of the movie was shot in here. Yeah, and we would just like even the when they do the full size train, the dream
yeah, yeah,
sequence, like that's in my garage, and then in that same room, that's Debbie's house. We built
sure.
some of the set in there. This room in here is what ends up being the office at the end of the movie.
Oh sure, yeah.
But because right before we got the grant, the green light, we bought this house and moved in, and the person that flipped it added this whole big room in the back that's like
Mm,
our living room, and it's huge. Like it's a really large, like it could be like a rumpus room or whatever.
sure.
And my first thought, even though I didn't vocalize it at the time because I know my wife would have killed me, but I was like, oh man,
Studio.
we could shoot so much stuff in here. And that's what we eventually did. But yeah,
Sure,
yeah,
sure. A little negotiation going, no, no,
yeah,
honey, no,
right,
no. This a
yeah.
nice
I'm like,
open
but we got a
space.
grant.
Yeah.
It's like I have to do it.
You have to. Think of it. It's going to feature this wonderful stuff.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
well, that's good. That's good. You have a significant other who's understanding. I imagine you kind of have to when you're filming in your
yeah.
house. So,
Oh yeah, yeah.
but
Yeah, and just be just that day that with all the kids like in the video camp
yeah.
class, that's all in that same room.
Oh, nice.
So it's like we had all those kids in our front kitchen area, which is not that huge.
Hmm.
That was like the green room, right? And so it's like and then their parents are here too, so it's like our house is just overrun with people.
Sure.
And yeah, it was it was definitely a test of the relationship.
I,
The
I
most people
did
we've ever had in our house.
I did like your cast of young talent as well that you found in here. Were those people that you knew as well, or was that a casting call for you? Or
Excuse me. Yeah, it was people I knew. So I knew a couple of them,
Mhm.
and then my friend Julie, who's in the movie as well. She's like the Karen-y lady that
Oh
brings the
yeah,
pizza up. Yeah, she was in Mystery Spot as well. She's very active with doing like theatrical productions at the local
oh,
middle
hmm,
school
hmm,
and elementary school. Actually, it was my elementary school that I went to, but she's plugged into a lot of the theater, the kids that are doing theater and stuff.
sure,
So she just had to say, hey, do you guys want to be in a movie? And that's where they all came. And a lot of those kids, like I've seen, because I'll shoot those performances for her, so
sure.
it's like I'm familiar with a lot of those kids already. And so
Hmm.
yeah.
And did you do some teaching in your past with young kids like
Oh
that as
yeah,
well?
yeah. I
Yeah.
would. There were most of the time I was delivering pizzas. I was delivering pizzas. I was doing the SP stuff at the medical school, and I was teaching uh, kids video camps. So
Wow.
it's exactly what Eric's doing.
Wow.
Going from one thing to another and living out of the back of my car, kind of. And meanwhile, I have a toddler at home and a wife, right? So it's like it was brutal, you know. Um, but yeah, I would teach video camps. It was pretty much, like what you see
Yeah.
in the movie. It was just
Sure.
like that. They would come in, they would drop them off with us. A lot of it was during the summer or during the winter break.
Mm.
So it's like
Mm.
a lot of parents would use it almost as babysitting,
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, of course. Yeah,
You
here
know,
you go. That's why you have summer camp. Here you go
right.
off to summer camp for
Yeah.
6 weeks.
Yeah. And so that was the challenge is like a lot of the kids, you're kind of like, they're not there really because they're into being a filmmaker. They just like,
Mhm.
that's where they have to go. But so the challenge was like getting them into
Oh,
doing the
right.
movie
Sure.
stuff,
Mhm.
and by the end of it, usually everybody's into making their own movie.
Yeah.
So it was fun. It was fun. And then we would have a screening at the end of the summer. and at the end of winter break, we would have a screening at the Museum of Fine Arts Theater where they would put it
Oh,
up their stuff up on a
nice.
big screen and
Yeah.
screen it. So that was pretty cool to see their reactions and stuff.
That's very cool you got to do that, though maybe not so cool you're doing that along with everything
Right. Yeah. It
else.
was looking back on it now. I'm like, how did I do that? I can barely like do one thing now. It wears me out. But yeah, so you do what you have to make it work, right?
Well, and it's one of those things where you're in that situation. You don't, at the time, you're doing what you can to do what you want and do make things ends meet and everything, and you don't really think about it until you stop and then you think and look back and reflect, and you're
Yeah.
like, "Holy crap! How did I do that?" So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I was lucky in that there were a few things here and there that would just kind of refill a little gas in my
Mhm.
tank along the way.
Sure,
Like I mentioned, Robert England was attached to that Ghost movie that was going on during all this,
right.
and we had kind of talked here and there. And I knew him through Lisa and all the Nightmare People, right? But I didn't like really know him. And
Mhm.
Nightmare on Elm Street's my favorite movie of all time.
Sure.
Freddy Krueger was like a hero of mine when I was a kid. I loved that shit. So one day he got the script for the Ghost movie. I remember, and it was one day where I was like running around between three places or whatever. And I remember it was the day that the first Thor movie
Yeah.
came out. Because I got a call from a number I didn't recognize, and we were in Thor. And
Mhm.
so I'm like, oh, I don't know who that is. Probably spam. I'm not gonna answer it. It goes to voicemail, and when we leave the theater, I listen to it, and it's Robert, and he's like, "Hey, I read your script. I love it. I'd really love to be a part of it. Here's my number. Call me back." And I'm like,
Oh
"What?"
shit.
Yeah, yeah. And so then I call him back, and then he returns the call on it that day when I'm
Yeah.
running around,
Yeah.
and he was just like, again, he doesn't know me. He has no reason to be nice to me.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
just a guy trying to get him in a movie that's not even like fully funded. I'm just trying to gauge his interest. See if he, but I mean, the shit that he said to me and the way he pumped me up about my writing and what I was
Mhm.
doing and the characters and how like well Lisa spoke of me and that how Debbie like he knows them and how he was just we talked for an hour, and
Wow.
he's like,
Yeah.
just let me know what I need to do,
Hmm.
call me if you want to talk about anything, and I've tried not to abuse that privilege or
Yeah.
whatever. But I both that conversation in my head and then the voicemail he left, I would save. And if there was a night that was super dark, I would just play that back and listen to it, just to like
Sure.
remind myself, okay, I'm not crazy. Like there's something here. I just gotta keep trying. And
You gotta keep
unfortunately, we never
doing
got to make that movie. But I
it.
mean that just that just that interaction meant so
Sure.
much to me. And I've had similar things with Debbie happen, and things like
Mhm.
that. But yeah, and that's the kind of stuff I would just sort of use to when I was really low, just to pump
Mhm.
myself up and be like, okay, I can do this. I can get through it to the next thing. Right.
And now here we are with your next thing with
Yep.
Inbetweening. And yeah, I is there one scene, and I always love asking this question because it's easy to pick scenes that were really, really difficult, but was one scene that you put together in this film that went so much smoother than you expected it to? Like you were planning for, you're like you knew it was coming up, oh, this is gonna be tough, and it just went like you're like chef's kiss, like wow, that we nailed that. That went really smoothly. Was there any particular scene?
Yeah. I would say probably this one stressed me out a lot. It's the musical number
Oh yeah. Hmm.
because I had initially planned like that was going to all be live action.
Hmm.
Like we had set up to shoot, like I had a studio rented, we had a choreographer, we had worked it out with Angelo's schedule where he could be here and like everybody was going to be in one place at one time because
Sure.
at the time Ty, the guy that plays Zombie Guy, he created, produced, and directed a musical called Titanic, the
Okay.
musical, and it's like a parody of Titanic, as if
Sure.
Celine Dion were there on the Titanic. But anyway, it was it.
Sure.
Yeah, it's really good, and it played off Broadway, and it's still playing off Broadway in New York, but it was really going well,
Yeah.
and so they had announced that they were going to open it in other cities. So
Mhm.
shit was getting like his thing was taken off,
Right.
right? So he was less available. And the whole reason I wrote that musical number is because I have all these musical theater actors in the movie. So I'm like,
Sure.
why not use them? Right. And so I was like, well, Ty's got to be in it, so I got to work around his schedule. So it's like I gotten all the pieces in place to shoot it for real, for real. Like we're gonna have girls in the back with pizza boxes dancing and twirling them and stuff. It was gonna be a whole thing. Or, I mean, it's,
Yeah.
as garish as we could get on the budget and time, right? But I was stressing out again, like the anxiety thing, like
Yeah.
from the other productions.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, can I do this? And I was kind of psyching myself out about it. And then I also hadn't yet wrote the song. Like I
Oh,
kind of
sure.
knew I had an outline of it, but
Mhm.
I was psyching myself out because I was like, well, what if I write this and everybody says it sucks? And then Angelo's got to sing on it. I'm going to present this piece of art to this guy whose music I've loved for my entire life. And he's going to be like, this is bullshit, or something like that. So I was, and I have several versions. Like there's a version of it that's like more like Coheed and Cambria
Sure.
ish. There's a version that's more metal. Like I kept second guessing myself. But then finally, we had shot everything around it. All that was left was to shoot whatever the musical scene's going to be, and we had the time blocked out. And so I was just like, you know what? Let me just see if I can make a song. Let me see if I can record it. And I recorded it, and I lucked out in that a drummer that I really like, Kelly Scott from Failure. He was doing a thing right just post COVID where he was like, I will put drum tracks on your song for very
Sure.
cheaply.
Mhm.
So I'm like, dude, I got to jump on that because I can do everything else. I just can't, I'm not a drummer.
Right.
And so when I sent it to him, I was like, oh shit, this could work. Like it became a real thing.
Mhm.
So once I got the song together, then I was like, okay, now's the time to like send it out and see if people are into it. But then I started thinking, I was like, man, everybody's kind of scattered. Why don't I just try to do this animated? And I will, because the animation company that did that it's different from Nick,
Sure. Yeah.
the
Mhm.
guy that did all the rest, because the animation company that did the musical number is a company out of India that we've worked with again for VFX on the other
Mhm.
stuff. Like they've done on Mystery Spot, for example, they would go in and add like make the set look more burned because the
Sure.
place was supposed to have burned down, or
Mhm.
they would rotoscope out stuff, like fixing stuff that we missed. They excel at that kind of thing. And but they would always ask me, hey, do you have any more work for us? Do you have any more work for us? And they told me, they're like, we also do animation, like 2D,
Sure.
animation. So I started thinking about it. I was like, hey, well, what would it take to do this?
Mhm.
And they sent me back a quote, and I'm like, oh shit, that will work. And then we had we had rough sketches of the characters. I sent them out, and so the first couple of things they sent me, I was like, oh, this could totally work, and we can do it. It would be much easier to do it this way because
Right.
everybody's remote.
Mhm.
I was able to basically what I had to do. It was around this time of year. Ty was coming home for the
Mhm.
holiday, so I got his vocals. Same with a couple of the other people. Angelo, I flew out and recorded with him out in LA, and we got it all together. And then I sent them the song, and it was totally different than what I had envisioned it because I envisioned it as live
Sure.
action the entire time. But then when I got back the animated version, I'm like, oh yeah, this totally works.
It-
And we could do stuff that I wouldn't have been able to pull off, like
sure.
trying to shoot. And then it's a cool transition at the end. I don't want to give away what happens at the end, but how it
Right.
cuts
Right.
from that to
Yeah.
live action, right? Like it just works so perfectly. So that's something that really I hadn't intended to do it that way at all, but circumstances, time, and then just my own mental well being
Sure.
led me to take this other path that ended up working out even better. So
Oh, yeah, and it's very creative, and it just fits within the rest of the theme with all the other
yeah,
animation stuff. It does not like it feels out of place. Like
right,
suddenly, oh, we've got an animated musical number in the live action movie. No, we've had
right,
animated, different things happen throughout the film. And
yeah,
yeah, I mean, it's visually creative. It's interesting. I dug it quite a bit, and maybe
thank
it's
you.
because I've now been covering indie films now for 12 years that it hit that sweet spot with me with conversations I've had with people because I'm watching your film and I'm ticking off boxes going, oh yeah, there's that, there's that, there's
Yeah,
that, you know, and
yeah.
it was just wonderful to see that envisioned it in a creative way. So what is next for Inbetweening? What you got going on with it now? What fests
So
and
I guess the next thing is we're doing like a special. I keep saying special event
sure,
because it's like more of like a birthday party cast and crew screening.
sure.
but we're doing that. And also, I have to do a local screening as part of the grant we got because I got it from
Ah,
the
okay,
Houston
yeah.
Arts
Hmm,
Alliance.
sure.
Um, so we're doing that on the 30th of December. That's the next time it's, and then there are a few festivals we're waiting to hear back from next year, both in the US and abroad,
Oh,
that were interested in it and asked for screeners. So hopefully that means like we'll probably get a
yeah,
program.
yeah.
I think, I mean, even if we get into half of them, it
Hmm,
would be a good run. And that would take us through like the summer basically.
sure.
And then I had it actually, I had a distributor reach out about it. I had two distributors reach out
Hmm.
about it. And then I'm also looking into like self-distributing film hub kind
Oh,
of thing.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Again, because I've been down this road so many times. I don't know if I want to hand it off to somebody else again, you know, especially this movie, you know.
right. Yeah,
you know.
especially this one. And I've been seeing more and more self-distribution lately because I've heard so many horror stories with distributors
Yeah.
as well, where people they give their film and then suddenly the film hits streaming and they're looking at it going, that's not the film I made, or
Yeah.
or in some cases, I know of a couple chances where they were not told that, they're showing their film at festivals and they weren't told by the main studio company that financed them or whatever. Oh no, they dumped it on streaming now, and you're like, wait, what? It's
Yeah.
not. It's what? It's
Yeah.
like,
Totally. And I'm like, yeah, this thing that I spent 3 years of my life on, like
yeah.
now I just don't know. I have no idea what's going on with it.
Mhm.
Let alone the money if you're
Right.
making any, but just like you're not even keeping me in the loop at all.
Sure.
Like, so I don't know if I want to do that again,
Mhm.
no matter how good of a deal it is. You know what I mean?
Well, where could people keep up with news on in betweening?
I guess the best place would probably be social media stuff. Like Instagram for me is Upstart Film, and on Facebook I'm just Mel House. I have an Upstart
Sure.
Filmworks page as well on there.
Okay.
Um, I do have a website, upstartfilmworks.net, but I'm very terrible about updating it. I'll do it like once a quarter or something, maybe.
Sure.
So really, like the social media stuff is probably the best way to
Mhm.
keep track.
Awesome. And I'll put those links down in the body description of the podcast and all that. And so are you just focused on getting in betweening out there and that right now, or do you got something cooking that you can plug or you want to plug or just
Yeah, it's pretty much just in betweening now. Like
sure,
I'm actually in betweening was the last thing that I had sort of in the hopper,
sure.
that I had sitting around that I hadn't made. So I don't know what would be next or what my next thing would be because there hasn't been something that like
Spark
fired me
yours.
up to
Yeah.
sit down and start writing or
Hmm.
whatever. So I don't know because the last like in betweening and mystery spot were both like these emotional like purges, that just sort of like
Sure.
I had to get out,
Hmm.
and uh that I haven't really had like I'm in a much better place.
Sure. Sure.
So it's like when the Red Hot Chili Peppers stopped doing heroin. You know what I mean? You're like, what happened?
what
There's
what the heck, man?
yeah, like,
Yeah.
but yeah, I don't. I guess
Sure.
because things aren't terrible, knock on wood.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's nothing that's really really getting the creative juices flowing necessarily. That's just how I've worked historically. I don't know. I don't say that that's the only way I can work. It's just there's nothing that's really piqued my
Sure.
interest. There's a couple of things kicking around in my head, but they haven't really formed into real things yet.
Sure.
So we'll see what happens.
Well, we'll definitely keep up with it. And Mel, this has been wonderful to talk to you today about in betweening. Yeah, I'll put as much information as I can, and I thank you for your time on this. And yeah, when you do have that next project or whatnot, love to talk to you again.
Yeah, for sure, man. Thank you so much.